centered on you today.
When the world's all as it should be, blessed be your name. And blessed be your name on a road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away, you give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away, you give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away, you give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away, you give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. Who else commands all the hosts of heaven? Who else can make every king bow down? Who your majesty rules with justice. Only a holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. What other glory consumes like fire? What other power can raise the dead? What other name remains undefeated? Only a holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Who else could rescue me from my fate? Who else could offer his only Son? Who else invites me to call him Father? Only a holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Come and behold him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Let's stand and sing this song. There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. He tinted skies with heavenly hue and framed the worlds with his great might. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God, created man,
Today we'll be reading Matthew 20, 1 through 16, the parable of the workers in the vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You should go and work in my vineyard. I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. About the 11th hour he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came, and each received a denarius. So when those who came were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began grumbling against their landowner. "The men who were hired last worked only hours," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered them, "Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want to do with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last."
Morning, guys. Morning. Happy Sunday. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. I invite you to turn a Bible there. We are in the home stretch of our Follow Me study, which I know you guys just can't get enough of. We have been greedily consuming the words of Jesus over the last few weeks, right? Yeah, no, not so much. It's been hard. The last few weeks have been hard. Jesus' words have come to us week after week like a sucker punch, because he starts this whole section by giving us this hard call to deny ourselves and come follow him. And we don't like that. We don't like being told to deny ourselves. And then over the last few weeks, we've been talking about how do we confront sin, and what about forgiveness and divorce and money, all topics that are uncomfortable for us. And so it's just week after week, it's like we're getting this punch in the gut, but it's good at the same time. It's been healing in some ways. And imagine that, the words of Jesus being healing. So we're here this morning because we want to get punched in the gut again. We want more of the words of Jesus, as painful as they are sometimes. And today we come to chapter 20. Now, chapter 20 it's kind of an arbitrary division. I don't know if you guys realize this. The chapter divisions in the Bible are arbitrary, more or less. They are superimposed on top of the biblical text to help us find stuff. And sometimes it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what this chapter division can do is it can mask the fact that this parable that we're reading this morning is connected to what came immediately before. It's actually part of a longer story. So what we looked at last week in chapter 19 was there's a young man who comes to Jesus and asks, "What is the way to eternal life?" And Jesus eventually tells him that he needs to sell all of his stuff and then come and follow Jesus. And Jesus then turns to his disciples and says, "It's really hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, it's easier for the largest animal in Palestine, the camel, to go through the smallest opening we could think of, the eye of a needle. That's easier than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And then the disciples say, well, that's no good. If the rich can't get in, then what hope is there for the rest of us? Because we all have this sort of greedy tendency to us. And Peter eventually pipes up. This is in verse 27 of chapter 19. Peter pipes up and says, well, what about us? We, the disciples, we've left everything to follow you. So what are we going to get? And Jesus answers that question with two responses. The first thing Jesus does is he gives the surface answer to the question up at the surface. He tells them that the 12 apostles are going to have these 12 thrones in the new world. They're going to judge and govern. But anybody who has left mother or father or land or children is going to receive 100 times as much in the world to come. So there's this unique role for the 12, but everybody is also going to receive as much as they've lost. And then the last sentence of chapter 29 is kind of cryptic. He says, many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. What does that mean? Well, that's what the parable that we're reading this morning is about. In chapter 20. This story that Jesus tells is Jesus' answer to Peter's question. First, Peter says, what about us? What are we going to get? And Jesus first answers the surface level, but then in typical Jesus fashion, he gets to the root of the issue. To what's going on underneath Peter's question. What's going on in Peter's heart that needs to be addressed. And that's what the parable's about, is addressing the heart of Peter's question. And we know that these are connected because the first word of chapter 20 is the word for. Or maybe you have something like therefore, but that tells you that is a coordinating conjunction. That tells you this is connected to what came immediately before. Also, in verse 16, Jesus repeats the proverb. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. That's exactly what he said at the end of chapter 19. So this story is bracketed by the same proverb at the beginning and the end. So all of that to say, that's a really nerdy way of saying, this parable is an answer to Peter's question, what's in it for us? So, let's just read the story together, because I think this is going to be helpful and instructive for us, even if we don't like it. So, chapter 20, verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house, who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. So we're dealing with a parable, a fictional story that Jesus tells about realistic situations, common real-life experiences that he will in some way twist or modify to teach about a deeper truth and deeper reality. And he begins the story with the familiar scene of a landowner who's got this big grape harvest coming in. The grapes are getting ripe. It's time to harvest. And so he goes to the city gates, which is where the markets are. That's where people are waiting for work. And he's going to go hire men to work for the day. Being a day laborer was a common position. A blue-collar, working class kind of work. I imagine the disciples knew what it was like to be a day laborer. Either they had done this kind of work themselves, or they certainly had family that had done this kind of work. These workers, they may have their own family land, smaller farms that they've already finished harvesting, didn't take that long. And now they go and wait to be hired. That is, they don't have any stable, reliable income. What you would do every day is get up before dawn, and you'd make your way out to the market, and you would stand in front of Home Depot, and you would wait for someone to come by and say, I need work, I need workers. If you're lucky, then someone will hire you, You'll have a job for the day. You get paid at the end of the day, and you'll have bread for tomorrow. If nobody hires you, then you won't work today and you won't eat tomorrow. You are at the mercy of these landowners. You're at the mercy of the contractors and the foremen. It's a very vulnerable position to be in because you're depending on others for your own livelihood. So you get up before dawn and you head down to the market, and here comes Mr. So-and-so. Very well-known man. He's got lots of land. He's kind of one of the pillars of the community. And he knows where the workers hang out. So he goes looking for help because it's time to bring in his grapes. You come to an agreement with him very quickly for a denarius. A denarius is not a ton of money. It's a common wage. It's not a fancy wage. Nobody's getting rich making a denarius a day. It's like a minimum wage, subsistence living, paycheck to paycheck kind of pay. And if you're the worker and you're agreeing to work for this 12-hour day for a denarius, how are you feeling at 6 a.m.? Feeling good or not good? You're feeling good. You got work today. You're going to eat tonight. You're going to eat tomorrow. You got work. This is great. You can stop by the market on your way home and buy bread, and your kids are going to eat, and this is a good deal. No complaints from you, and so you're whistling on your way down to the field to get started for the day. Now, verse 3. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and to them he said, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you." So it's the 3rd hour, it's about 9 in the morning, and Mr. So-and-so goes into town for supplies, and he sees people who have been standing there for about 3 hours, and no one has hired them. If you're one of these workers, and it's 9 o'clock, it's already rolled around, you haven't gotten a job, how are you feeling? Maybe a little apprehensive, maybe today is not going to be your day, but Mr. So-and-so gives you a job. He says, "Go into my field, and I'll give you" what? How much is he going to pay them? Whatever's fair, whatever's right, whatever's just. Okay, so they don't negotiate with him. They're not in a position to negotiate. You take what you can get. They head out to the field. Verse 5. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour, and then again the 9th hour, that is at noon, and then about 3 p.m., he did the same thing. He found people still sitting around waiting for work. And this is where it starts to get weird, in verse 6. And about the 11th hour, that is about 5 p.m., he went out and he found others standing, and he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" And they said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." So 5 o'clock, it's almost quitting time. Mr. So-and-so sees that there are still workers standing at the city gates waiting for work. And he winds up giving them a job. Now, at this point, I think we're supposed to wonder, what kind of workers are these? What kinds of people are still standing around at 5 o'clock? Are these the young, strong, skilled workers? Probably not. We're probably talking about people who are weak, they've got a bad back, sickly, disabled. We're probably talking about the immigrants who have been deliberately overlooked because of their race. We're probably talking about the elderly, perhaps women. And when Mr. So-and-so sees them, he sends them into his field. And we're thinking, why bother? Like, the sun is getting low, it's almost dusk, and the best of the work is already done, most of the work is already done. By the time they get to the harvest, it's already almost finished. It's just going to be a field full of sweaty and exhausted men with just a few loads of grapes to take back to the barn or wherever you keep grapes. And this is where it gets even weirder. Verse 8. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." First will be last, and the last will be first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Right? So it's dusk, sun's going down, it's time to pay the workers. Mr. So-and-so has them all stand in a line, with the first being last and the last being first, which is a very strange way to pay. It also seems strange that they would all be privy to what everybody else is getting paid. But regardless, the ragtag group that came along at the end of the day, they stepped forward, and what do they receive? They get a denarius. They get a whole day's work, or a whole day's wage. That's very generous, because they came in the cool of the day, and they chipped in a little bit, but everybody was starting to clean up when they got there, and yet they're being paid the full wage. If you're one of those ragtag bunch that came in at the end, how are you feeling right now? Good or not good? You're feeling good. You're stoked because you had resigned yourself that you're only going to make a few pennies today, but instead you wind up with a whole day's worth of work, or a whole day's worth of wage. Now, the workers at the back of the line see this, and they, how do they start to feel? They're probably starting to feel a little excited, right? Because they saw what happened at the beginning, and now they're just standing in line waiting to get up to the front. And they're going, "Oh, what's in it for us? You know, Mr. So-and-so's feeling generous today. What are we going to get?" Which is the same question that Peter asked. Verse 10. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. So no extra pay for them. Mr. So-and-so was generous with them, but he wasn't generous with me. And you know what? You can say it with me. That's not fair. That's not fair. Verse 11. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." Now, when they were hired at 6 a.m., and they agreed for this denarius for a day's worth of work, did they feel good or not good? They felt good, right? They shook on it, and they whistled on their way down to the field because they were happy with the arrangement. How do they feel now? Now they're feeling gypped. They're feeling angry and bitter. Why? What made the difference? Well, the offense came when they started comparing what they had to somebody else. Their complaint to Mr. So-and-so is not, "Hey, you shorted me. This isn't what we agreed to." Their complaint is that they have their pay in their hand, and they look around and they say, "You have made them equal with us. We're not equal." It's about comparison. It's about envy. And I think most of us have experienced this. Something goes well for somebody else. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, somebody from work or school or church. And when something goes well for them, you smile and you're like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you. That's great. That's awesome." But there's something going on inside that we're bitter about it. We can't really be happy for somebody else's success. We're annoyed and we resent their success. This week, maybe it was last week, we measured 116 degrees at our house. That was the highest that I ever saw on our little weather station. 116 degrees is dangerous heat for chickens and dogs and for children. And so we were cooped up the last couple of weeks, as I imagine many of us have felt kind of cooped up. Cabin fever has been bad at the Bullard house. It's been bad. Texas summers are relentless. I don't know if you knew that. And on Facebook, the same day that I see this 116 degrees, I came across pictures of a family member of mine who shall remain nameless, who is on vacation in Canada, hiking through the mountains, canoeing on this glassy lake, wearing hats and coats. And it feels really petty to say this out loud, but I was really envious. I would like to think that I don't get envious very often, but that was upsetting because I was at the peak of feeling cooped up. I felt anger. I think anger is probably it's not exactly the right word, but resentment for sure. And Katie said, "Hey, did you see the picture? Went to like." Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I remember a few years ago, I had just finished school and was looking for work. And there was a guy that I knew from school who was just calling to check in. He knew that I was looking, and he was just calling to see how things were going. And I told him that I had an interview, and he started giving me advice about how to negotiate for a salary. And without going into his advice and the whole conversation, the advice that he gave signaled to me that he was making approximately 3 times what I was making. And I still to this day, I believe that he was not trying to showboat or gloat or something like that. I think he genuinely was trying to help. But what I extracted from that conversation was not thank you for the help. Basically, I extracted from the conversation this. What I was doing is I was looking at the denarius in my hand, and I was looking around at others and saying, "Are you kidding? He got that?" Most of us have probably experienced something similar. We're familiar with this feeling that something goes well for somebody else, and in your heart, there's resentment. You look at them and you say, "God, are you kidding me?" Maybe someone gets a promotion at work, and you find out and you just do the little golf clap for them. "That's awesome, Barbara. It's awesome. So awesome. It's just awesome." But secretly, in your heart, what you're saying is, the boss doesn't see what I see. She didn't really work that hard. She doesn't deserve that. And secretly, you resent that things are going well for someone else. Or maybe it's not at work. Maybe it's just a friend who invites you over to see a new toy. And you go over and check it out, and boy, it is slick. It's snazzy. And you do the good friend thing. You're asking about how many horsepower it's got, and what caliber it is, and what breed it is. And maybe you even ask how much it costs. And boy, that's just awesome, Clyde. Sure is nice. It's just awesome. But what's happening on the inside is you're comparing, and you're dissatisfied, where 10 minutes earlier you were content. Maybe it could be that it's somebody else's spouse, which is dangerous territory, or someone else's kids, or an opportunity that came, or status, or rank, or pay. I mean, it can center on anything. But it goes well for somebody else, and on the outside, you show happy, you present happy, and you do the golf clap. But the truth of what's going on the inside is ugly. You guys know what I'm talking about? Has anybody ever experienced this? It's like it's a pleasant feeling, but it's not a pleasant feeling. On one hand, we don't like seeing the vacation pictures and the new toy and having to do the golf clap, and we kind of like, oh, I don't like that. But on the other hand, I think there's something about it that we're like, yes. We kind of savor feeling like we have the moral high ground. We love feeling like we have a right to be angry. And why do we do this? Where does this come from? What's going on in our hearts that we respond like this when things go well for somebody else? Well, the parable's not over. The early bird comes to Mr. So-and-so and he voices his grievance that you have made them equal to us, even though we work way more and way harder. And Mr. So-and-so gives a response, and he says basically three things to them. Look at verse 13. But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go." This is the first thing that he says. He says, we had an agreement, and I kept my end of the bargain. And as I'm reading through this story and studying this and getting ready for this message, I hate that is true. There's something in me that hates that that's true. Because when I read this story, everything in me just wants to gripe and complain and say it's not fair, and I want to cry foul that I deserve more. But the reality is, we had an agreement. This isn't about justice. You want to think it's about justice, but it's not about justice. This is about something else. Second thing he says, verse 14. Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? I'll tell you what, when I read that, I felt personally attacked. And as I'm taking notes on this section, I found myself arguing with Mr. So-and-so. And I wrote in my notes, it is your money, but you can't spend it however you want. This is payroll. When we made our agreement, we were establishing a going rate for hourly labor. You were surrendering your right to charge different hourly rates for labor. I found myself arguing with a fictional character in a fictional story about a fictional injustice. What is wrong with me? It infuriated me. What infuriated me the most was that even as I was writing that, I knew it was bogus. Because I hate that this is true also. I want to say that this is about justice and find some way to prove that Mr. So-and-so is wrong, but the reality is my argument is just flimsy and petty, and it's full of resentment. Which brings us to the third response that Mr. So-and-so gives. He says, or do you begrudge my generosity? Some of you have a translation that says, or is your eye evil because I am good? The evil eye is a Jewish idiom for greed and stinginess. What he's saying is, are you just bitter because I was generous to somebody other than you? If I choose to be generous to somebody else, what does that matter to you? And why do you hate that? As people have grappled with this story over the centuries, this story has annoyed people for centuries. And as we have dealt with it, a number of interpretations have come up of what Jesus is really talking about. Probably one of the most popular is that this story is about people who become followers of Jesus early in life versus people who become followers like on their deathbed. And well, we put in decades of work, but we all get to go to heaven, and it's the same pay for. First of all, I don't think that that's right. I think that's a possible implication of the text. But I don't think that's Jesus' main idea. Jesus is responding to Peter's question of, we've left everything, what's in it for us? Jesus perceives in Peter a bitter root of envy, comparison, and stinginess. And this story is very successful at bringing that envy to the surface. And Jesus is using the story to invite us to examine the inner workings of our own hearts. The story does not provide a way forward. The story itself doesn't tell you what to do about envy. The way past envy isn't in the parable. The way forward is found in the life and ministry of Jesus himself. Jesus came to begin a new way of being in the world, a new reality. He called it the kingdom of heaven, he called it the kingdom of God, he called it eternal life, but he was establishing a new thing. He's establishing a new humanity. And he went around announcing that this kingdom is here, and it's now, it's upon you. Repent and believe this good news. He went around inviting people like